Earful Tower listeners, this week we got Stephanie from Paris in Action, which does kind of like city hunts. They're sort of treasure hunts, but for Paris. And she's revealing her favorite Paris secrets. I can guarantee you've not heard all these ones before. Let's get on with it.
One man, one country, one red scooter. Here's the Earful Tower with Oliver G.
Stephanie Quachette.
Yes.
Hello, welcome to the studio.
Thank you for having me.
How did you find the stairs?
It was okay. I kind of prepared myself, but I made it.
Physically or mentally?
Yes, I did some training.
Wow, that's a new one.
No.
So you are the woman behind Paris in Action.
Yes, I am.
There might be people out there who are thinking, what's Paris in Action? Which is strange because I would have just explained it in the intro. But in your words, what is Paris in Action?
Well, Paris in Action is a company that organizes city hunts. So city hunts it's a mix between a treasure hunt and a scavenger hunt that allows people to visit Paris and explore Paris in an interactive way. So really to take in things that they may have easily missed that have interesting stories behind them.
So this isn't you've buried something somewhere and it's not that kind of hunt, is it?
No, really. It's the things that are part of the city that Parisians pass every day and they just don't notice. So, for example, just before we were talking about a building a few, not like 3 minutes from here, where from the outside it looks like a regular building, but it's actually completely hollow and it's a ventilation shaft for the train. And so if you're just walking by, you could just think it's a normal building. You don't know it has this little quirky story behind it.
So it's like a fake building. It's
basically.
It's a facade of a facade, you might say.
Right.
You could say that. I think I'll shut the window. It's a lovely day in Paris, but I'm hearing a lot of bells and buses. I don't know. I think the listeners maybe will enjoy that. But for me,
the
it's
atmosphere
distracting.
of Paris, yes.
Yeah. So just bear with me. Now we're locked into the studio. The studio just down the road from the fake facade. I'm going to go check that out. What's the address of it? Do you know?
It's 145 Rue Lafayette.
Wow, there you go, listeners. You're getting a freebie. But what Stephanie's coming in for today, and I think we get straight into it and then splice it up with a little bit of conversation, is 4 of your favorite sort of little-known stories about Paris. I've got that right?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, and why have you chosen these stories?
Well, I chose these stories because each of them is linked to a place in Paris that either people may overlook or may not know about, and so I thought it was a good way for people to know some of the history behind the city as they visit.
I'm excited. I love Paris secrets. My spider senses are tingling. What's the first one?
Speaking of spiders, actually, that's related to the first one. So the first story is about...
Full disclosure, I did have the list in front of me as well, for people who think that I just guessed you.
It was very impressive.
But go on. There you go.
The first story is about the Museum of Modern Art. So most people, when they think of the Museum of Modern Art, they probably think about the Centre Pompidou, which is the National Museum of Modern Art.
The big blue-red one that looks like a Mario kind of building.
Exactly,
yeah,
like inside out, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's actually another Museum of Modern Art. It's the Museum of the City of Paris, and it is in the 16th arrondissement, just across the street from the Fashion Museum, the Palais Galliera. And this museum is the site of the crime, if you will. So in 2010, there were 5 paintings that were stolen from the museum. Paintings by Picasso, Matisse, other really well-known artists, and paintings that were worth millions of euros. And they were stolen by a criminal who has acquired the name of Spiderman because of his habit of climbing up buildings.
Do they call him Spiderman in French?
We do, Spiderman.
Spiderman.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be l'homme de spider or whatever spider is in French? No.
I think they like the Spiderman.
Yeah, it's nice. It's unusual they take an English word like that, though. They don't usually do that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, it depends. They like the sound of it. But, so he climbed up the wall of the museum and went in through a window and stole these 5 paintings. And there was a big panic, of course. And finally, he was caught along with his accomplices who were an antique dealer and a watchmaker. So the watchmaker was the last one to actually have the paintings, and he claimed that he had panicked when he knew the police were on his trail and that he threw them in the trash.
A likely story.
Yes, people were very suspicious. They think he probably hid the paintings somewhere.
Yeah.
So all 3 are in prison now, and the paintings were never recovered. The police searched the trash. They never found them. So the idea is that they're still hidden somewhere so that when the criminals leave prison, they can go and find their treasure.
So we should, when we wait for the watchkeeper to come out of prison, and then we follow him to wherever he's hidden there.
Yes.
And then we cash in. That's kind of ironic that the watchmaker is now serving time in prison. Jeez. Okay, that was a cool story. So you could go and check out the museum in the 16th.
Yeah, and it's actually their permanent collection is free to visit, and so
yeah, that's the one where you walk in. There's the big sort of pastel-y wall of color.
Exactly, it's beautiful. Yeah, it's called La Fée Électricité, and so it was created for the Universal Exposition of 1937. And so it's a beautiful mural that's from the top, from floor to ceiling, and it includes different inventors from different times in history, all linked to electricity or some type of event.
That's pretty cool. You know your stuff. Like, you're not sitting here reading 1937. When you do these the hunts, you follow along? I don't really understand. Are you following along with them sometimes, or you just give them the directions? Or
it depends. So there are public hunts where people are in groups, and it's kind of a fun competition element. And there, the groups are independent, and they go off on their own. And so the idea is that anyone can participate in the hunts, even if they don't know Paris at all, because they have a map and they have directions. So really, people, even I'm not very well oriented, and I could manage to follow the trail of the hunt. And then there are other hunts where it's personalized, and so I could go with the participants or someone else, and then it could be really on the theme of that they want. So
cool.
For a birthday or something like that.
So do you feel like you know Paris inside out?
I mean, I'm sure there are new things that could surprise me, but I think I know the city pretty well.
You know about the crocodiles in the canal, right?
Yes.
That's a new one. You should put that in your hunt.
It is. There is in one hunt. There's the story of the crocodile, and there's not this new update of the mysterious
the canal one. So you did the one in the Seine River.
Seine, yeah.
I'm referring, of course, to season 2 finale of the two crocodiles in the canal. If you haven't listened to that, guys, after this one, go back and listen to it. Anyway, back to you, Stephanie.
Well, that's why I say I always learn something new, because I think I know the city pretty well, but that's what I really love about Paris, that there are always new things to discover.
Me too, right? Like, I feel sometimes like I love the history, and I love hearing the stories of things that have been shared a million times, but I also love, like, when that lady told me that she'd put crocodiles in the canal, I was like, what? This is a new twist on this cool city, I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there are lots of stories like that. You can kind of play detective in Paris and try to figure things out.
That's Definitely. Pretty cool. Speaking of playing detective, this is a bad segue, but what's the second story you brought in?
Well, the second story is a story about, we can say, a real-life Romeo and Juliet.
All right.
Maybe there can be a detective element to it.
Even better.
We can see at the end. So this is a story of a couple who lived in the 12th century in Paris, and their names were Heloise and Abelard. And so they were both actually well-known scholars at their time. Heloise was known for her study of Greek and Hebrew, and Abelard was just a really known philosopher and theologian, and people kind of followed him around. He had a school. And so Abelard became the tutor of Heloise when he was given a place to stay by her uncle. Heloise lived with her uncle. And soon they began an illicit affair together. Yes. So, which was very shocking at the time. And Heloise became pregnant. Abelard sent her to stay with his sister, where she had their baby, whose name was Astrolabe.
Oh, nice.
Yes. And so she came back to Paris, and her uncle really insisted that the couple get married to protect Heloise's reputation.
Not to mention Astrolabe.
Yes. Well, we don't really hear much about Astrolabe, actually, in the history.
Surprisingly.
After that, yes. Yeah. That's one of the mysteries, I guess, what happened to...
That's why we need the detective.
What happened to Astrolabe. But we know that what happened to Heloise and Abelard was that they did get married secretly, even though neither one really wanted to. Abelard thought it wasn't good for his career, and Heloise, she wasn't really big on marriage, so she kind of had certain views about marriage, but they agreed as long as it was kept a secret. But her uncle didn't keep a secret. He started telling people, my niece married Abelard. And so Abelard sent Heloise to stay at a convent to kind of get away from the rumors, and her uncle was furious. He thought that Abelard had made Heloise become a nun. And so he sent a group of men in the night to Abelard to castrate him. And they did. And so
Well, they cut off his astrolabes.
that they did, and he was understandably upset about that, and he became a monk, actually. And he convinced a reluctant Heloise to become a nun, and they didn't see each other for years. And then they started exchanging letters, and it started when Abelard when Abelard wrote a letter called "The Story of My Misfortunes," and he basically talked about how he had seduced Heloise, and it was his fault, and that was the reason for his downfall. And so Heloise wrote him a letter back saying, "No, it wasn't your fault. We fell in love." And so over the years, they just exchanged letters back and forth, and these letters, some of them are still exist today from the 1100s, and so and 1200s, and so they died at different places. She was in a convent, and they were far from each other. But the tale goes that they were reunited in death because they have a shared tomb in the Père Lachaise cemetery.
Lovely.
And this was really one of the things that made the cemetery really popular in the 1800s. So before all of the names we know today that are in the cemetery.
Oscar Wilde, Edith Piaf, and all that.
Yeah, exactly.
So they were like the rock stars that got brought in 600 years after they died.
Yeah, well, they there's their tomb in the cemetery, and there's also a plaque with statues that have their faces on them on the Ile de la Cité on the house where they lived. So there's two markers in the city of their.
Right. I learned I've got a fact for you.
Okay.
And maybe we talked about this when we met for coffee the other day, but did you know that there was a third island on the on the islands in the center of Paris, right?
You were
yeah,
starting
we're
to tell me about it. But
and then they brought out coffee and interrupted us.
Yes,
the Peloton Cafe, those guys, friends of the show. It's okay. So yeah, I was actually at a friend's house, and they had this big map of Paris from like 1400 on the wall, right? And I walked up and I looked. I love maps, like more than any kind of picture. I love maps. And I looked at the two islands in the middle of the city, Ile de la Cité and Ile Saint-Louis. And I was like, hang on a second, there's a third island there. And I looked at it. There was a very clear big third island. And I said to the woman who owned the house, "There's a third island here." And she said, "Oh my God, this picture's been in the house for years. I never even noticed it." Oh, wow. So I started Googling around. It turns out that third island was called the Île aux Vaches, like the cow island, and it used to be full of cows in the 1400s, and they used to graze on pastures of grass there until they got rid of the cows and they filled it in and made it into one big island. So it's on the east side, whatever that island is, Ile Saint-Louis, I think.
Yeah.
And so I went down there and had a look the other day, and there's a restaurant right on the corner called Île aux Vaches, named after the third island.
That's so cool.
How cool is that? Cow Island.
Yeah.
So you guys at home listening, wondering about Cow Island, if you ever go to Paris looking for Cow Island because your map's from the 14th century, it's not there anymore. It's Ile Saint-Louis. Anyway, whoa, what a tangent.
No, but it's great because I that's what I really love about these little references to the past that still exist. Restaurants or hotels that have the name of the place that used to be there. So.
Don't you think? I think there's, like, when you're learning, how good is your French?
It's okay now. I've been here for almost 9 years.
Someone asked me, a regular listener asked me, at the live show actually, they said I should ask my guests how they learn French and if there's any tips. So I'll ask it for the first time ever.
Okay, well, I think that's a good question because when I first came to Paris, I didn't speak French. I'd studied French for a year, but I didn't speak French, and I actually had to go to extreme measures because I found that I wasn't improving my French and that I knew people who stayed here for years without improving. And so I decided that I would only read books in French, only watch movies in French.
Wow.
And I was a student at the time living at the Cité Universitaire, which is university housing for students who come from all over. And so I asked to be put in the Maison des Provinces de France instead of the Maison des États-Unis, instead of the American house, because I couldn't be with other Americans.
That is an extreme measure.
Yes, I've calmed down since.
You tortured yourself, basically.
Yes.
And now your French is?
It's better now. I mean, I did my master's in French, and the language was French. I studied sociology, but I feel good now.
Congratulations!
But it took that self-torture.
Jeez, well done, and thank you to Cyril, the person who asked that question. Good question.
I think it's a good question because people have different tips and different ways of learning.
Yeah, that's a cool story. I never heard of anyone going to those measures. So well done to you. What I was going to say about learning French, I wonder if you agree, is that I think there's these three levels that you go through, especially when you're living in France and learning French. And the first is, and it's just about basic things like restaurants. So, for example, this Île aux Vaches restaurant that I'm talking about, when you move to Paris and maybe you don't speak French, you see that restaurant and you just see words. You think, I don't know what that means. That's just Île aux Vaches. I don't know what that says or means or translates to. The second level is when you know enough French to be able to translate it. So you go, oh, that means the island of cows. Right? Mm-hmm. And then the third level is when you get the references in restaurant names or bar names, when you're really getting somewhere with French and you look up and you see, Île aux Vaches or whatever, and you go, oh, it's the Cow Island, and that's in reference to this famous song or this famous part of history. And that's when you're really starting to master French. What do you think?
Yeah, I really agree, because I think the language is so tied to the culture and the history, and it's actually a fun way to discover the language. It makes me think of these old signs that are kind of scattered throughout the city. So a while ago, before most of the population could read, shop owners had to have a way to kind of draw clients. And so they had these little play on words sometimes above their store shops. There's one called the Signe de la Croix, and it's a big swan that's around a cross. And in French, swan is signe, and so it's like the sign of the cross. So a little play on words, but and it's still there. But little things like that.
So many things like that. I think you're right. It is really tied to the language, and you don't know it. Even when you learn the language, you still have to learn the culture that's tied to it. You know.
Exactly.
There's another one. I did an episode once about favorite words in French, and I went around and talked to like 20 people and asked them for all their favorite words for no matter what reason. And one of them was Sam Barantes, who sang the jingle in the first two seasons, right? And his word was Ménilmontant, which is a place in Paris, and he just said, because there's a lovely song that goes Ménilmontant, mais oui, madame, right? So I was up in Ménilmontant a while afterwards, and there was a bar called Mais oui, madame, right? So I walked past, and it was exactly that three-level thing. I saw it, and I go, well, now I understand why that bar is called Mais oui, madame,
Yeah.
I love this city, I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, what have you got for a third story?
Well, maybe I can tell another story that's near the Île de la Cité. Well, not too far. This is about a really popular tourist attraction, the Louvre. So most tourists, I think, who come to Paris visit the Louvre. Yeah. But what they don't know probably is that this was the site, the Louvre and the Jardin des Tuileries, the Tuileries Garden. This was the site of a really big castle, a palace in the past in French history, where for generations French royalty lived.
You mean in the bit around the glass pyramid?
No, well, right in front of the pyramid, between the garden and the pyramid, there was this big palace. Oh. And so, in fact, the Louvre, if you look now, there are three sides going towards the Tuileries. There was a fourth side. And this is the side that has been forgotten, basically.
The fourth wall.
Exactly.
We're breaking the fourth wall. You mean, so this is where there's the big port that leads into the Tuileries as well?
The Arc de Triomphe du Carrousel. A little arc that is actually, it's a miniature version. Well, there's the Arc de Triomphe on the Champs-Élysées, and then there's the Arc de Triomphe des Tuileries. And so, yes, right behind the Arc, there was this palace. And so royalty from Henry IV all the way to Emperor Napoleon III lived in this palace. And it was actually burned down. And the story of it being burned down actually started in 1870. There was a war, the Franco-Prussian War, and Paris was under siege. So for 4 months, Parisians couldn't enter or exit the city. And so they were running out of food. And so they had to resort to eating dogs and cats and then finally zoo animals. So there's actually a menu from the 99th day of the siege, where it was Christmas dinner, and there were things like kangaroo and camel on the menu. And so they surrendered in January of the next year, 1871, and there were a group of people who really blamed the government for this defeat, and so they created a movement called the Paris Commune, and so in March of that year, they took over the government. They started burning down government buildings, they burned down the Hôtel de Ville, and they burned down the Palais des Tuileries. And so the palace, there was a big dome on top. They put explosives in the dome. It exploded. The palace burnt for 48 hours. Really, the interior of the palace was destroyed. Yeah, And the fire even started spreading to the Louvre. And fortunately for us all today, the art in the Louvre was saved by museum workers and soldiers, or else the Louvre itself could have been burnt down in this fire.
Wow.
And so after the fire, they never rebuilt the palace. They rebuilt the Hôtel de Ville, but they didn't rebuild the palace because of what it represented, the monarchy and the past.
Wow, I didn't know any of that stuff, except the bit about the kangaroo on the menus. But
that is an interesting part.
Well, it's relevant to me as an Australian. It's been hard to get it ever since 1870. But that's really cool. So it's interesting to think that all the art in the Louvre has been, even so recently with the Paris floods, when they had to move some of the art around in there, it feels like the world and the elements wants to get rid of that art in the Louvre. Yes,
there have been some close calls.
Yeah, fires, Nazis.
Theft, right? I think the theft of the Mona Lisa was one of them, yeah.
Nazis took art, didn't they, from there?
Yeah, I think there's a story about that.
And then floods, what else do you want? It's amazing. I mean, all these people go to the museum and just think they're looking at a collection of art. That stuff has survived.
Right.
Anyway.
Definitely. Well, there have been talks in recent years, like in the last 10 years or so, about rebuilding the palace. So when the palace was first built, there was, if you looked from the Champs-Élysées, from the Arc de Triomphe, past the Place de la Concorde, in fact, there was a straight axis that all of these buildings were on. It was really a beautiful view that ended at the palace.
Oh, wow.
And so when the palace was burnt down, it just kind of ends. There's nothing there, because the Louvre is slightly off the axis because of the way the Seine is. And so the idea is that by rebuilding this palace, it can really add to the beauty of the city. And Charles de Gaulle called it the jewel in the center of Paris. So it really add to an already beautiful city. And it could be a place to keep the extra art that isn't on display in the Louvre, because...
That's not soggy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's not enough room in the Louvre to display all that.
Well, they need to make a bigger Louvre because there's too many tourists there as well, isn't it?
Right, so the palace could serve that purpose. And as well, everything that was in the palace, the furniture, the art, it was saved because it had already been moved before the fire because of the war. So they had wanted to protect all of that.
Right.
So they could just put that all back in, add some art.
You know how long it would take for them to rebuild, not just to rebuild that if they ever do, but all the admin that's going to go into that. It won't be in our lifetime.
We have about it. And it would cost more than 300 million euros, I think I heard.
No, not going to happen.
But maybe.
You think?
I don't know. That'd be nice.
Wow. What else have you got for us, Stephanie? Although, let's talk a little bit more about Paris in action first. So what kind of people are you getting on your tours? There's tourists? You get Parisians or?
Yeah, well, actually, when I first started my company, it's changed a bit. The first idea was to do activities in English, but for French people who wanted to improve their English.
Right.
Because what I've learned from living in Paris is that a lot of Parisians say they don't get to practice English enough. So if you're a tourist and they speak to you in English, it's usually because of that. And also that they don't get to visit their own city. The idea of métro, boulot, dodo.
Which means?
We just go from the metro to work and then to sleep. You don't really enjoy the city you live in. And so the idea of my activities was that Parisians could take advantage of their own city while practicing English. And so I still organize some language hunts in French and in English for language learners. And then it actually just spread from there, where Americans, other tourists started participating. And so, tourists, but locals, expats, just a mix.
So in terms of the foreigners that do your tour, is it mostly Americans?
It has been so far, but actually it's mostly Americans, but a bit international. I had a Danish group this last weekend, and Indians, Italians. It's really interesting to see how many people, how different people can be drawn to Paris. Yeah.
And they've all got one thing in common. They want to know more about the secrets of Paris. Maybe they're listening right now.
Maybe.
The people that are listening right now, maybe they're sitting on their computer. They want to look you up. It's parisinaction.com, right?
Yes, exactly.
parisinaction.com.
Yes.
I did an American accent.
Thank you.
I don't know why. Okay, have you got more stories for us?
Sure. Maybe a final story.
Let's do it.
So this is a story about time.
Okay.
It's right at the end of our time.
Yeah, well done. Wow, your segues are better than mine. Very good.
So this is a story of the Paris Meridian. So I don't know, do you know the story of the Paris Meridian?
I don't know yet.
So the Meridian is...
Sounds like a cocktail. I'll have a Meridian.
That does sound kind of classy.
It's not about cocktails,
No, it is not,
No.
Unfortunately. It is about navigation and time telling.
Okay.
So there was a time when there was a quest to find the Prime Meridian, so the line from the North Pole to the South Pole that kind of divided the world into. And so in Paris, there was a researcher named Arago who decided that the line went through Paris. And so he did lots of research in finding the exact location of the Paris Meridian. And in the end, in fact, after an international conference, it was decided that the Prime Meridian went through London. So unfortunately for Arago and Parisians, French people, the Prime Meridian today, when we use Greenwich time, it's because we decided that the line goes through London. But there's still a trace of Arago's Paris Meridian, which has largely disappeared. There are on some French maps, you still see the Paris Meridian. And there's also a series of medallions, little discs throughout the city. You may have seen them. They say Arago, and they have N and S.
How do you spell Arago?
Arago, Arago.
Arago, okay, yeah.
And they go from the north to south. And so they may seem random, but in fact, they follow the Paris Meridian.
Wow.
So you could follow them from the north to the south of France. And there's a line that goes through Paris. There are a few near the Palais Royal. And the Palais Royal is also where you'll find a small cannon. And the small cannon was the idea of I'm realizing we're coming full circle because...
Wow. I'm sitting here with a dumbfounded look on my face. This is rare. Usually I'm ready for a question. You've got me. You captured me. Keep going.
Well, we've come full circle because the small cannon was the idea of a watchmaker who had a...
Spiderman collection. No.
No, that would be full circle. He had a small boutique in the Palais Royal, and he asked for this cannon to be installed. It was a pretty genius idea. The idea was that at noon, the sun would shine on a small magnifying glass, which would light the cannon, and it would fire. And so everyone would know that it was 12 o'clock, and they could set their clocks. And so the cannon was on the Paris Meridian. And it was later moved. Right now, you can find it in the garden of the Palais Royal. It's just a very small cannon. It's really easy to miss.
How small is small?
So small that the original cannon was stolen by someone.
There's a lot of thievery in this city, isn't there? Guys.
So somewhere in Paris, maybe someone is... Right now, they have the little cannon on there.
But what is... I mean, like this, you fit it in your Louis Vuitton handbag?
You could.
Yeah?
You could just...
If you had one. I don't. Could you fit it in an Earful Tower tote bag?
You could.
Yeah?
You probably
like
could.
a lunch pack of Notre Dame kind of thing?
Yes, it's very
on
small.
sale for €15 on the site? Oh, wow.
It does not come with a cannon. I
No.
imagine. But yes, you could. And so now the cannon that's there is a replacement. And it's said to be fired on Wednesdays at noon. I can't confirm this because I've heard different stories. I've never heard it go off. But maybe if you're ever in the garden at 12 o'clock, you
in
could.
The Palais Royal.
Palais Royal garden. It's the side. It's near the front, and it's just in a little square. You'll see it says in Latin, this clock only counts happy hours or sunny hours which
is only Wednesday at midday for the French, apparently.
Because it would only go off on sunny days because the magnifying.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
So, why another question about you dumbfounded me. Yeah, I wanted to know this Meridian line, right?
Yeah.
So they're coming up, essentially everyone wants the Meridian line to be through their city and country, I imagine. So they can go, whoa, everyone wants to be Greenwich. Is that how it worked?
Right, and each country had their own meridian, but the idea was that there needed to be an international agreement because of, with the advent of trains and so the world could coordinate, basically.
Sure.
So the world at this time is really a European, American type
So there was no reason really there was no reason to have it in London or Paris. It could have been one or the other. It's not that one was better than the other one.
Well, French people would say that there was no reason to have the London line, but it was agreed upon. And the only countries that didn't accept this agreement were France and Brazil.
Which obviously wanted its own meridian.
Yeah, maybe that's a whole other story.
I bet there's a series of medallions down Brazil as well that they're very proud of.
That could be.
Could be.
That could be the case.
Anyway, Stephanie, time is running out. Speaking of time.
That was a good one.
I borrowed that one off you. The cannon's about to fire, and Spider-Man's about to shoot his web out of his... No, I've lost my...
It was good. It started
well. But for people who want to book a an experience with you. Paris in Action. I mean, I'm going to share all the links on the site as well. I'm also going to share pictures of this stuff that you've talked about so people can visualize it. The Meridian medallions and the cannon, which I'm going to go and try and explore. This is what I love about meeting people like you. You give me these stories, I go looking for them. And then I feel like it's like an extra, I feel so lucky that I'm doing this podcast that I get to learn this stuff and then go out and find it and share it with everybody.
Well, I'm sure you're becoming quite the Paris expert. You probably know more than all of us because we each know our little piece.
And, the thing is, like, there's so many good stories that you just can't. Even one of the stories you did today, I'd heard before, but such a different version. It might have even been on the show, I'm not sure, but it's such a different version. You told it so differently that it felt like it was new, which is great. But I think that's the beauty of this city is you can hear all these stories. The storyteller adds their own bit to it, that tells it their own. It's great.
Yeah.
So keep doing what you're doing, Stephanie.
Well, thank you. And you as well. I'm really enjoying the podcast.
Yeah, you're a listener too.
I am.
We can say that. When I met you, I bumped into you on the street before we were meant to meet, and you had me in you had the earphones in your ears listening to an old episode.
Yes, that was quite strange. I took them off and I still heard your voice.
Isn't that weird? It would have been better if I could have continued the story that you were listening to.
Just picked up right.
You were listening to the Finding Mary one, right?
I was, which is
one of my favorite episodes of the whole show. So after you've finished this one and after you've listened to the crocodile episode, and after you've been on ParisInAction.com, listen to Finding Mary.
That's quite a list.
And before we sign off, you are breaking ground here at the Earful Tower by offering something to the subscribers of the show on Patreon. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Really nice idea, by the way. Thank you for that. Because I'd never even thought to give stuff away to the lovely subscribers. But what are you offering the lucky winners?
Well, so for any of your members who are coming to Paris or who live in Paris, they could have the chance to get 2 free spots for a private hunt. So the hunt would begin at their hotel or apartment or wherever they are, and we'll take them through Paris where they'll discover some of these mysteries that we talked about.
So it's kind of personalized if it starts at their hotel then.
Right.
That's very lovely.
For a birthday or
Okay, well, this is how I'm going to do it. This is new. This is my idea of how we'll give it to a Patreon member. If anyone doesn't know what Patreon is, it's the paying subscribers to this show, the people who allow it to continue, lovely, generous people. Patreon.com/The Earful Tower. When you're hearing this, when this episode goes out, 1 week from the day that it goes out, if you are a paying Patreon subscriber, you are in the draw, and I'm going to randomly generate one of your names to win the prize. And I'll announce it in the episode after this one.
Great.
So that was very generous of you. Thank you, Stephanie.
Well, thank you, and I'm excited to see who
Yeah,
wins.
me too. Well, so you've got a week. Sign up on Patreon, and if you're already on Patreon, jump over and listen to the little extra chat that Stephanie and I are about to have. See you on the other side, Stephanie.
See you soon.
You're listening to the Earful Tower podcast.
Well, that was it. That was Stephanie. Interesting woman indeed. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. I'm going to spend the next 2 minutes talking to you about what you get if you support the show. So if you're not interested, now is the time to turn me off. There you go, still here? If you're still here, that's very kind of you. Thank you for just listening, and we can gossip if you want about all the people that have... No time to gossip. Listen, I'm just going to lay it out there for you. My dream is to make the Earful Tower my full-time job. That's pretty much it, plain and simple. And to make that dream a reality, I'm asking you guys, the listeners who love the show, to consider becoming a paying subscriber on a website that's called Patreon. Now, chances are you heard me talking about Patreon before. The idea is if you pay a monthly subscription fee, in return you get access to a bunch of bonus stuff. Mostly the walk show videos, but also things like bonus audio episodes. Like Stephanie from this episode you just heard, she hung around to talk about the Place de Vosges and all the secrets there for a good chat. So really, well, if you think the Earful Tower is worth $10 a month, then that's the level that I recommend you signing up for. You'll immediately get access to a closed Facebook group where I do all the live walk show videos, and there's already a bunch that you can watch. I mean, there's hours worth of footage there to watch already. And it's a pretty easy commitment. It's very easy to back out of if you don't want to support, or if you only wanted to support for a short while. It's not a commitment by any means. And you can pay as little as $1 a month if you only want to dip your feet. There's about 5 different tiers there for you. But once again, I want to make this podcast my main gig. And at the moment, I'm freelancing here and there to pay for the expensive Paris bills, but I want to give that up. I want to give the bills up too, but I haven't figured that bit out yet. I want to give the freelancing up. So please consider helping. And remember, if you're signed up before the next episode comes out next Monday, you're automatically in the draw to win the tour from Stephanie in Paris in Action. So, Lastly, if you want to support the show but you perhaps don't have the money to spare, you can always write an iTunes review. And here's one from this week that I really liked. It made my day, and that's what I'm going to finish on. So, headline, Ultimate Podcast for Francophiles from Courtney in Paris. 5 stars. And she writes, this is there's capitals there, the podcast to learn about aspects of the French culture that you've maybe never stopped to think about. Oliver's appreciation and childlike curiosity for all things French makes every show original and utterly charming. Childlike curiosity, I like that. He tracks down experts and expats to interview and enlighten listeners as to what it means to be French. Light-hearted and fun, Oliver's mission is clear: give French culture to the people. And I hope that's what we've done with today's episode, and I'm looking forward to talking to you next week again. Thanks for listening, guys. Talk soon.